So if we think a little bit about the global challenges that we have with water, it's the need for global trade, industry, jobs, economic growth that's driving people to move to cities all around the world. And again, these challenges that we have with providing clean water, providing good sanitation, are very relevant today as well. We know that the world's population is growing steadily, and this rising population is increasingly moving towards cities. So to give some context for this, in 1930, about 10% of the world's population lived within cities. By 2013, this had risen to 50%, and it's estimated by the United Nations that by 2050, 70% of this expanded global population will live in cities. Interestingly enough as well, in terms of the scale of some of those cities, the United Nations again estimates that in 2016 we had 31 megacities. That's cities with 10 million residents. It's estimated that by 2030, so really not far away, we'll have 41 cities of over 10 million residents. Increasingly, the centre of this growth is in Asia and Africa, and that's a pretty significant change as well from the patterns of urbanisation that we've seen in Europe and North America. It's much more rapid. I mean, Barbara Norman suggests that to accommodate the extra 3 billion people we're going to have on Earth, we're going to need to build one city of 1 million people every 5 days between now and 2050. So what we're seeing is a really very significant change. These kind of trends about people moving to cities are increasingly putting more pressure on cities to provide basic services, to help keep their citizens safe, healthy, prosperous, and ultimately provided with water. I think we're all aware that these patterns of growth are quite unsustainable from lots of different perspectives, and they're likely to drive environmental degradation, poor living conditions, and social and economic inequality as well. I think ironically, but many countries and many places have both water scarcity but also abundance of water. If we look at the United States, many of the fastest growing cities are also in regions with least water, places like Texas, Arizona, and Nevada. So there's a real mismatch between where people live and the availability of water, particularly in many of the low and middle income countries. So what we're seeing is that the pattern of growth is not necessarily matched by the provision of clean water and sanitation. So in summary of some of these challenges, around 844 million people don't have access to clean water, and 2.3 billion people don't have access to a toilet. It's estimated that around a third of the urban residents in Asia and the Pacific are without access to shelter, safe drinking water and sanitation, or clean energy. All of those things go together. And it's estimated that by 2030, water demand will exceed our current supply by about 40%. Many of the global cities are having a real concern about this. Places like Cape Town and Mexico City are actually quite worried that they'll run out of water before too long. There are specific health issues around this lack of access to water too. I mean, diarrhea caused by unsafe drinking water, by poor sanitation, is estimated to cost the lives of over 1,000 children per day. We know that presently there are about 1 billion people living on land that's vulnerable to flooding, but it's also expected that with climate change this will rise to about 2 billion by 2050. So while population issues are the biggest challenge that we face around water, climate change is also causing some problems too. In many areas of the world, droughts are increasing, but in others it's actually flooding that's the biggest risk, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. We also know that rising sea levels will displace many people and lead to migration, and it's also potentially contaminating some of those water supplies. In terms of rising temperatures as well, it's estimated that much of our food will need perhaps between 5 and 20% more water to grow better. And then finally, for much of the world, snowmelt from glaciers currently provides water for around 1 billion people, but those resources are at risk as our climate warms.